to the sound. To the sound.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be, or good evening if you're somewhere way far away. Unusual day stream for me. I usually stream at night, but today I'm going to stream to the day. I have no plans today. I'm off. I got nothing today. So I was like, last night I had a stream, and I was talking to Grayson, who is known as Base Theory, and he had a discussion he had with MadebyJimBob about a month ago, and he had asked me and asked other people, hey, can you steelman his position? And I'm like, okay, well, let me listen to it. It's an hour and 30 minutes long, which I'm not going to be able to review the whole thing because I didn't listen to the whole thing. I literally only got past the first 10 to 15 minutes or so. And I will be watching the rest, but I wanted to talk about the first 10 or 15 minutes because I think there was a lot to unpack there. And I wanted to try to seriously try to steelman Jimbob's position, because I think I know what he was asking, or at least attempting to. The problem that I'm finding is that Jimbob uses words differently than people in philosophy. His understanding of the concepts seems to be a lot different than my understanding and the understandings of what I've read on these particular topics. And so as a presuppositionalist, as a presuppositional apologetic person, that's one of the things that presuppers do. They try to obfuscate by weaponizing philosophy and asking questions that, one, the average person is not going to have any understanding of, and two, they themselves don't have an understanding, nor could they answer their own questions. Many times their questions are meaningless. But even when they're not meaningless, they're very, very in-depth questions that require a significant amount of understanding and ability to communicate the answer in an uninterrupted manner. This is something that presuppers don't allow. They don't allow somebody to fully articulate the answer to the question when they're being asked something, especially when it's along the lines of something very complicated in philosophy. And so one of the things that they bring up is moral grounding and metaphysical groundings and things of that nature. And a lot of people, especially the atheists out there arguing with these presuppers, don't really know what they're asking. And that's understandable, because I don't think they even know what they're asking. I really don't think that presuppers really know most of the time what they're really asking for when they ask these questions, because they seem to, at least to me, have some misunderstanding. So I'm going to review the first 10 minutes of this video or so, and then I'm going to get into some of the problems I have with how they ask these questions about metaphysical groundings. If you can hear me out there in the live chat, wave hi. Usually my crew comes out at night, so I don't expect to have a lot of people listening this morning. I'll get the replay crew, and then you can leave me a comment on the video, and if you have any questions. But if you got questions, ask as I go along. It probably will be at least an hour video, maybe even 90 minutes. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. This is not dealing with easy stuff. This gets into philosophy of mind. It gets into causal determinism. It gets into a lot of complicated subjects. And this is the strength of the presupper, that they are weaponizing these types of difficult concepts, because again, their interlocutor is not going to generally know about these things. Matter of fact, I don't think most people, if you ask them on the street, hey, what is a metaphysical accounting? What is a grounding? You think many of them want to know? No, probably not. Right? Hey, John. Hey, Autistic. Hey, Awesome. Hey, Twisted. Hey, John, follow along with me on this. Let me know what you think as we go along. I love your input on this. If I'm screwing the pooch, let me know. If I'm not, then yeah, tell me that you agree. Because I will be talking a little bit about determinism. I will be talking about some of the properties that we expect to have for grounding. Because again, I think that the presupper is misunderstanding what is being asked. I think they're asking the wrong question, or at least they're trying to convey the question in a very inarticulate way about what is being asked for metaphysical grounding. It's more than just a explanation. It's more than just causation. Matter of fact, grounding should be non-causal, which is a big mistake I think that Jimbob makes, but we'll get into that. So let's watch the beginning of this and go. Hey, Kano. Hello. All right, so let's watch this real quick, and then I'm going to try to explain it. So here's Grayson, and he asked for us to help him out. So let's see if we can do that for you.
I wish we could have had some actual conversation about science, but neither here nor there. If you guys could please like steelman his
I'm gonna
argument so
try,
maybe
man.
I
I really am.
understand what his point is better, I would appreciate that. And then if there's anything that you thought that I didn't give a good answer to or that you have a better answer for, I would definitely be interested in hearing
Well,
y'all's
that's why I'm
feedback
doing
on
this.
that.
That's
But
why I'm
without
doing
any
it.
further ado, here's my debate with Jimbob.
All right, let's do it.
You're an atheist, so I'm sure we can talk about lots of science topics.
Well, right off the bat, though, I still don't understand why everybody seems to relate atheism to science. And because to me, the theists doing that, it's like, oh yeah, you know what? You're an atheist. You got to love science. Okay, what's wrong with that? They think that because atheists tend to like science, not all of them. I mean, just again, generalization. But what's wrong with liking science? Without science, we wouldn't have many of the things that we have. Now, I agree. There's some people that go too far with that. They think that science is the only way to acquire knowledge, which is scientism, which I'm very much against. But science as a whole has done amazing things for society. So I don't understand why it's always, hey, you're an atheist. Let's talk about science. Why don't you talk about atheism? I mean, seriously, why don't you talk about God and why God doesn't exist? That's atheism.
Okay, well, if you're an atheist, I would say that your very name-based theory is very limited. If you're
I probably started way too
if you're an
early,
atheist,
but
that you don't have anything to base anything on.
I want
No
to get
offense.
to the part where Grayson comes in here in a second.
But there's nothing. There's no base. I mean, you might as well call your name assumption theory.
See, and I talked about this last night. There's nothing wrong with having assumptions. This presupper nonsense that you can't have assumptions or somehow some assumptions are bad makes no sense. We all have assumptions. There's nothing wrong with having assumptions. Should some of those assumptions be challenged maybe every so often? Yeah, sure, whatever. But there are fundamental assumptions we all make that are indubitable. They're irrevisable. They're something that just cannot be any different if you want to be rational in society. We all have these. So what? And atheism is not a presupposition. It's a conclusion. It is the conclusion, hey, God doesn't exist. There are no gods. That's why I use it in the global sense. There are no gods. Not just the Christian God, but there's no gods. There's no intelligence in the universe that's guiding it. That's how I mean by atheism.
Metaphysical based too? Well, I mean, how could you be an atheist with any account of metaphysics? You want to tell us?
Yeah.
Jump on.
Yeah, jump on. I look, I'm a non-believer. I'm not an atheist, but I will talk about metaphysics. What precludes an atheist from having everybody has metaphysics. Everybody, metaphysics is just a study of things that are beyond like the physical level, but things like knowledge, time, morals, epistemology, all these things are just beyond the physical things of the natural universe. But that doesn't mean that they're supernatural or anything like that. It just means that there are subjects out there that are not just reducible to, the laws of gravity or something like that. Moral theory isn't reducible to natural law like that. I mean, it could be natural. I'm not sure I say that. It could be other natural laws out there, but it's not going to be reduced to physics, right? Moral theory and physics are completely different things. But to say an atheist can't address metaphysics, then what the hell are all these philosophers out there that are atheists that deal with metaphysics?
You can come on and tell me how you account for metaphysics.
Okay, right there is where it starts going downhill. Right at the very beginning. What does it even mean to account for metaphysics? Metaphysics is how you explain accountings. Okay? Metaphysics is a subject. And I'll give you a brief explanation of a more grounding. I'll talk more in depth after this. But a metaphysical grounding is how you have a non-causal explanation to explain a certain phenomenon, something that exists, or something that you want to have an explanation for. And it's really important that you have certain properties with that, which I'll get into. But it doesn't make much sense to say what is your grounding for this entire subject, because that is the subject of metaphysics is meta. It is the explanation of how you go about grounding something. You don't ground. I don't know what it means to ground metaphysics. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but metaphysics is something that you would use to explain how you would ground something else. How do you ground morality? How do you ground an explanation of how we have qualia, how we have pain, how we have sensory, how do we have mind, how these things are grounded? That's what you would use in metaphysics.
From an atheistic view, I'll be nice. I'll be nice!
Oh my God, that was so loud. I forgot he did that. Don't do that,
Hey,
Jimbob.
base theory, Grayson.
Jimbob, don't do that
Hey,
on your
Jimbob.
stream. It's
How
bad
you
for
doing?
people that have hard of hearing.
I'm doing
and
pretty well. I'm
don't do
not
that.
super familiar with your channel. Somebody commented on one of my videos and said that I should talk to you about, theology, evolution, etc.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
And so right when I checked for your channel, you were live streaming and I hopped in. So
Now, you notice, though, they had told Grayson to go talk to him about evolution and biology and paleontology, things that he knows about. He does biochemistry. So immediately, Jimbob goes, oh, let's talk about metaphysics. Right? It's like, oh, I don't want to talk about the subject you know about. I want to talk about the subject that I can twist and weaponize, because Jimbob does not have a solid understanding of this stuff. And so he's just kind of throw things out there. But he knows how he just changed it. He's like, I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about metaphysics. Okay.
hey, I appreciate talking with you.
Hey, no problem. I mean, being that we have short amount of time, because I'm at my 3-hour mark, we should go for something that we can play ping pong quicker with, which means probably not theology. Are you?
And they go for an hour and a half, by the way, more.
You an evolution proponent?
Sure am.
Okay. From your view, are all of our thoughts and beliefs and evaluations effects of natural processes?
Okay, so right there is the precept tactic. Oh, you believe in evolution. Okay, let's talk about theory of mind. He doesn't talk about evolution. He gets into theory of mind and determinism, like it has any relationship to evolution whatsoever. He's talking about not the science. He doesn't care about the science of evolution. He's trying to undermine his justifications for believing in it, which is really silly. Because if you can do that, you're going to do that by asking about the topic itself. There's no reason even here as a presuppositionalist to get into metaphysics of your beliefs. But I am going to steal Jim's argument. I did listen to it, and I think I did have a handle of what he's trying to get to, which Grayson does kind of miss out on. But I could be completely wrong on it. Like I said, he asked me to steal man it. I'm going to do the best I can. And this is the best I can come up with as I go through this. But why does his beliefs, whether he ascribes to determinism or non-determinism or libertarian free will, why does it matter? It has no bearing on if evolution is true or not, or why he believes in evolution. What Jimbob's going to attempt to do, and this is my steel manning, he's going to try to show that Grayson's beliefs are predetermined, therefore anything that he acquires is already predetermined, including knowledge. Therefore, he's not acquiring anything. He's just going through this automatic process. He's just a machine, a biological machine that's not actually acquiring any knowledge, because the processes by which he acquires the knowledge is deterministic. That's Jimbob's argument in a nutshell, at least as far as I can go.
Yep.
Okay, so if I have a brain that produces an output called a proposition, and you have a brain that releases an output called a proposition, and both are caused by strict mechanisms, cause and effect, chemistry, etc., then what methodology do we have to determine the truthfulness of either?
Okay, so propositions and thoughts are both of them are intentional. Propositions tend to be intentional as well, but thoughts are definitely intentional, meaning that something has to do with thinking. And our thoughts are what we're going to be evaluating when we evaluate a proposition. These things are not deterministic as far as the ability to deliberate on a proposition. This is where I think Jimbob makes a very fundamental mistake about determinism. Determinism is that there are causal relationships and there's antecedents to an event, that everything has some kind of causal relationship to it. That's determinism. But that doesn't mean that we're not allowed to have the ability to deliberate and have conscious understandings of a topic and to try to deliberate on a proposition. So he's arguing here that our minds are the result of some kind of deterministic process, which to some degree, obviously, they are, if the mind either supervenes on the brain or some kind of physicalist approach. That's what he's asking for. That the propositions we're thinking of are still conceptual. And if they're still conceptual, then how do we determine the truth value? Because we're not actually processing anything. These are just an algorithm. This is just a machine that he's arguing. It's all mechanistic. But that's not how determinism is understood. There's still the ability to deliberate. We still have consciousness. Now, it might be illusionary. That some arguments for that as well. But we all understand that when we think of a proposition, we are thinking to ourselves, there's something to do in the thinking. There's a mind there that's evaluating the proposition. The determinists would say that if you knew all the physical properties of the mind and you understood all the different possibilities, and what they mean by this is that something could have been different. You could have thought something different. Alternate possibilities, they're called. If you could know every alternate possibility and every state of the universe at the time, you should be able to a hard determinist with not many, I don't think a lot of people are hard determinists. You should be able to predict the outcome of the mental state. And there are some issues with that, even from the deterministic point of view, because there was something called the Laplace demon, who basically argues from Laplace that if you could do this, you could rewind the history of the universe and be able to explain and see everything in the universe and know what happened deterministically. But there's a problem with that because of entropy and the amount of information in the universe. In fact, the amount of information in the universe from the beginning of the universe, I looked it up, it was 10 to the 120 bits. 10 to the 120th power. That's a lot. That's a high number. And even if you calculate it at the speed of light, and even if information could transfer faster than the Planck length, you could never calculate all possibilities of the universe. So even if you were a super genius, even if you were a super genius, in finite time, you can never calculate all possible possibilities for alternate conditions, alternate possibilities. So we couldn't predict what somebody could do, even if we had all the calculation power ever possible. The universe is limited in the calculation that it can do. There's a finite amount of time there. There's a finite amount of information that's processable. This is the problem with simulation theory. But the determinist has that problem with it. So it does seem we have some kind of will. Our evaluations of propositions are not completely deterministic. There is some kind of choice being there. And even in determinism, we have that choice. It's not going away because it's just kind of like a machine. A machine has no choice. It follows a very set algorithm, right? It's going to get the output. You put it in a calculator, it's going to get an output because it follows an algorithm how to calculate. But we are not calculators. We have a mind, and I don't think even Jimbob will say that we don't have a mind. Now, again, it gets into really complicated philosophy of mind, which is probably one of the most difficult things in philosophy by far. And I don't fully understand half of it in philosophy of mind. You could read Chalmers, you can read Nagel, you can read all these different authors. I've been looking up some of these papers for weeks on end, and I can get through about a quarter of this stuff and still go, I can get the crux of it, but it's very, very complicated. And I think he uses that to his advantage because he's never read any of those papers either. But he weaponizes because he knows Grayson's not going to understand it. But the big mistake that he's making so far, or trying to confuse Grayson with, is that, you're just a machine, you're just deterministic, so your thought and your propositions are the same thing. And therefore, you're not really evaluating anything. How do you get to the truth value of a proposition if all you're doing is just the end result of this process in your brain that you have no control over? Which is really dishonest because that's not determinism.
You have to test whether or not they comport with reality with empirical observation, measurement, or experiment.
Yeah, and I think Grayson is correct on that. What he's basically saying is, look, I can observe something, and that is a direct causal link. When you're talking about justifications, not groundings, but justifications, how you do that is say, how am I justified to hold this particular belief? And one of the ways you can do that is called direct causal theory, which means that I see something and that has a causal relationship to my mind, and that allows me to say that this is the state of affairs. If I have a cup with coffee in it, which I do right here, why do I have a cup of coffee there? How am I justified to say this is a cup of coffee? Well, because there's a cup here and it has coffee in it. That's how you do it. That's welcome to philosophy. There's nothing wrong with that. We all agree, I have a cup of coffee here. There's reliability of the senses. Once you start getting into radical skepticism, say, well, how do you know it's a cup? You're no longer doing philosophy. You're doing presuppositional rhetoric because you're outside the realm of rationalism. And I've noticed Jimbob says some very irrational things all the time. All presuppers do. Presuppers, I think, by definition, are irrational to me personally because they literally go out of their way to obfuscate, and they literally will say things that are just absolutely contrary to critical thinking. if I tell you this is a cup and I have coffee in it and it functions as a cup, we'll go like for functionalism. What is this doing? Well, it has coffee in it. So it's a coffee cup because the function of it is to hold coffee. It's acting as a coffee cup. It doesn't have to have coffee in it. It could be a water cup. But it would call it a coffee cup or just a cup because the function of it is just to have something in it where I can drink. If you start arguing that that's not a coffee cup for radical skepticism, you can go full, Descartes, radical skepticism. But that's not going to get you very far. And you want to talk about that kind of philosophy, fine. But to bring it up to Grayson, what's the point? He answered the question properly. How do you justify anything? Well, I see it. Well, could you be hallucinating? Well, yeah, but I have the reliability of my senses. I test it with other people. If we all agree that this is a cup, then why argue about it? If you want to argue this is not a cup, then I need to have reasons why that you think this is not a cup. And radical skepticism is not a reason. You could postulate anything you want. Aliens are making a holographic cup. Okay, but do you have any evidence to support that? You can hypothesize anything, but these are not rational reasons to doubt that this is a cup. Once you start doubting reality, you are in the realm of irrationality. Oh, say hi to Alex and Chewy. Okay, no, thank you. So far, so good, guys. I mean, am I steel manning him?
Okay, so if an evaluation or proposition is determined by strict mechanisms called the brain, why wouldn't testing be also?
Okay, there's a difference between the testing of the proposition and your belief of the proposition. If you observe the testing of the proposition, Steve has a cup in his hand. That's either true or false. You're observing, I have a cup in my hand. That proposition is true. Why? Because there's a state of affairs by which that makes the proposition true. That's called a truth maker. That's how you determine it. That's perfectly fine to justify like that. When presuppers tell you that that's not fine, they're lying to you. There's perfectly fine to say, well, how do you know the proposition is true that Steve has a cup in his hand? Right now, you don't know. Do I have a cup in my hand? Do I have a cup in my hand? The best answer is to be agnostic on it, right? This is where agnosticism comes in play. You have no justification to believe whether I have a cup in my hand or not because I'm not showing anything. I could have a cup in my hand. I could not. Did I finish drinking? Do I have? You don't really have any really good evidence either way. So you would remain agnostic to Steve have his cup in his hand, right? But if I tell you, oh wait, look, I have a cup in my hand. Now you know the proposition is true, but it may have been false. Maybe look at the time I don't have a cup in my hand. Propositions are with respect to something, especially with time, they can change. The proposition can change with time. But at a certain time, the condition was a state of affairs of the universe. Well, that's what it was. But once you start getting into, well, how do you know there's a cup there? How do you know? How do you know? The Side 10 version. And you got to remember the Side 10 version that he's running kind of stuff, that's not the actual presuppositions that Von Til, or maybe Bonson, but Von Til wasn't really arguing. The Side 10 clones are not the same as presuppositional apologetics as you'd find from a philosophical standpoint. Not saying that their philosophical apologetics is right, but they don't get to that type of just base nonsense. Okay, they do start with the assumption that there's a God, and that by God you can formulate other things. They presupp God, okay, but they don't go so far to say, look, how do you know there's a cup in your hand? What they'll say is, that knowledge is given by God, and that's the grounding. Well, it's not even a grounding, actually. I shouldn't say grounding. It's the reason why people have the ability to have knowledge. Okay, but that's not the Side 10 clones. The Side 10 clones are like, well, how do you justify there's a cup in your hand? How do you know that? Because there's a cup in my hand. That's all you got to answer to the presupper. And when they don't accept that answer, you know that you're dealing with somebody who's not rational or not being honest. Because if they're not going to accept you have a cup in your hand, why are they going to accept anything else? They're not there to explain anything to you. They're not there to listen to your discussion. They're there to make you look silly because they can weaponize philosophy. That's what presuppositional apologetics is on the internet. So.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I mean, are you just saying that because ultimately we have to impart information from our senses, that somehow makes it not reliable?
Well, it's not reliable because it's determined. So if my proposition is determined by brain matter and your proposition is determined by brain matter, then the very methodology you call testing would also just be an output of mechanistic cause and effect.
Yeah, and that's why this is what I'm steelmanning. Jimbob's arguing that how do you know something if you're going to test it when it's already just been predetermined? Do you really know anything? Are you really acquiring any knowledge because it's just been predetermined? But that's the problem with that, is that it's not predetermined, and it's not that fully deterministic. I can make a choice. I can make a choice whether I want to evaluate the proposition or not. I can do an experiment. That's my choice. Now, is it a free choice? Maybe not. I don't believe in libertarian free will. But it still doesn't mean we don't have will. There's still something about indeterminism, or I shouldn't say indeterminism, but in the theory of determinism, like soft compatibilism, that allows a mind to make a decision. Now, that doesn't mean that the decision is not completely free of undue influence, external or internal. There is influence. It is still based upon things in the brain. We know that if you have physical problems with the brain, you have a brain tumor or an injury, it can affect your mental process. It can change something fundamentally about you. We know this. This is not even in question. There are people with radical brain injuries or people with tumors or things of that nature where the person becomes somebody else for all practical purposes. Something about them has changed. They may like something more, they may dislike something more, but it has actually affected their mental state, which makes sense. I mean, that shouldn't even be something that's controversial. If let's say I prefer chocolate over ice cream or something, or vanilla, and I get a brain injury, and all of a sudden my brain is telling me I hate chocolate, but I like vanilla better now. Something about it. Some people don't like cilantro, right? Some people don't like hot, spicy food. Like cilantro is one of those things that some people say it's like really off, like tastes like crap. Or licorice, black licorice, just another thing. Some people like it, some people don't, and I think it really is a mental thing. It's not just a preference with licorice and cilantro. It is, some people don't have the enzyme to break things down, maybe, or some people just, their brain is telling them it is something else. But if you had a radical injury where your brain is telling you it tastes like something else, and I've had, people that had COVID, your taste goes weird. Things don't taste right. Right? So something is affecting your mental process. We know that the mind is affected by the brain. We just don't understand how. But he's arguing, well, if all this is deterministic, then anything you do to experiment is just deterministic as well. That you're not actually doing any evaluation. But it's so dishonest because you are evaluating it. You can't just eliminate the mental process. Now, you can try to argue where that mental process comes from, whether it's reducible to the physical, whether it supervenes on the physical, whether it's emergence. Whatever theory you want to go to, that's fine. But Jimbob just poo-poops everything away and say, oh, well, you are just 100% a biological machine. You have no control of your actions. But we know that's not the case. We do have choice. How we have choice, who the hell knows? It's a very complicated thing. Even for the libertarian free will, how do they make a decision? Think about this. If you're a libertarian free will person and you believe that you are absolute free choice without any influence, then what is it in your brain that makes that decision? How do you end up deciding for anything? Because once you have a causal relationship for your decision, you're no longer libertarian free will. It's self-refuting at that point. Because if your decision is based upon something else that's affecting you, that making you, have that decision, then it's no longer libertarian free will. They have to account for that, so to speak. If Jimbob is trying to argue that Grayson can't make a decision, well, how does Jimbob do it? How does he make a decision? How does he evaluate a proposition? I mean, there's something in his mind that's doing this. And if he says, well, no, it's, complete, I believe in indeterminacy and libertarian free will. Okay. Then what was the causal mechanism that made you have the decision? How did you get to that decision? Was it just randomness? Did you randomly come up with a decision? If you make a choice? Well, no, it's based upon something else. Oh, so you had a thought process that was based upon something. So it influenced you. You see where I'm going with this? There's a lot of problems with libertarian free will.
Yeah, it is an outcome of mechanistic cause and effect, but that doesn't mean that it's not a reliable measuring device for objective reality.
Well, I know, but that's what's in question. So what you're saying now is that we test things. So we make propositions that are merely effects of our brain.
No, again, I think there's an old expression. People confuse the territory with the map. You've all heard it before. And what that means is the map that we have is a guide to the actual reality, the actual territory. Our brains have a concept And that concept will postulate a proposition. That proposition's truth value is absolutely independent of the thought. The truth value of the proposition is solely dependent upon what the truth maker is for that proposition, or truth condition, depending on which theory you're using. You know, if I believe that I am taller than Grayson, which I don't know if I am or not, but let's say I believe I'm taller than Grayson, what makes it true? Well, there's a truth condition there. There's a relative difference. That's called a truth condition. If I say that I have a cup in my hand, what makes that true? Well, the truth maker is that there's an ontological object here that makes that true. That's the correspondence theory of truth. Now, it gets really complicated when we get into the grounding, which I'll be talking about, what makes this a cup. Because this cup is basically, if you think about it, just an organization, a composite of primitives, of atoms. That's all it is. Atoms that came together in a specific shape to form a function to do something, to hold coffee. But does that mean there's an actual cup there, or does that just mean there's a bunch of atoms that are in some kind of configuration that we call a cup? That's called mereological nihilism. That's a far more interesting topic than what he's asking for. But that's what it goes into metaphysical grounding. What does it mean by having a cup here? Why is there a cup there? Well, how is that grounded? And the grounding is not causational. I can say that I have a cup here, and I ground that in that the atoms have been in a structure that forms what we would use to hold coffee. So I call it a coffee cup. That's the grounding. The atoms didn't cause the cup to come into existence. It didn't. There's no causal relationship there. They're just the organization of the atoms. That's what a metaphysical grounding is, guys. It's a non-causational relationship between something to something else. And we'll get into the more detail in that. But it's not a causational thing. I think Jimbob thinks that a grounding is, well, how do you ground something? How do you explain causations? But a grounding isn't supposed to be causal. It's supposed to be non-causal so you can explain it in a different way. If I said, I used an example the other day. Let's say I hit a baseball and the baseball goes through a window. What caused the baseball to go through the window? Physics. But that's not a grounding. The physics explains it, but that's not a grounding. Or is it the agent? The agent hit the ball. But no, that's causal. Right? Those are non-groundings. Those are explanations. Why did the window break when the ball hit? You know, why did the window break? Okay, well, it broke because the ball hit it. Well, why did that cause it? Oh, because of material hardness, and the window shattered because of stress. Okay, but what causes stress? Okay, well, natural law. All these things are causal relationships. You know, or you can just say, oh, well, the window broke because, you know, Steve hit the ball and the ball hit the window. That's another explanation, right? But that's an agent deterministic explanation. It was agent dependent rather than causal dependent. Why did the window break? Steve did it. Okay, I'm an agent. But if I say, why did the window break? And I want a causal relationship because the baseball hit it. Oh, okay. Then you start getting into physics, but that's not the same as a grounding.
And now you're saying the very methods we use to test those evaluations or propositions are somehow independent of strict cause and effect, meaning the interpretation of the experiments and the data you're saying is independent of just cause and effect.
Yeah, because we have minds, Jimbob, and our minds allow us to have consciousness that allows us to independently verify what we are observing. We can evaluate the proposition by experimentation. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know why presuppers, especially like Jimbob, think there's something wrong with that. This is how critical thinking works. I believe something, I want to test it, I do a test, I get confirmation of that or a disconfirmation of it, whatever theory you're using. I mean, I think what's called the hypothetical deductive method is a little bit stronger. It's not, because the problem with some types of science is kind of the inductive method is that there is an argument to be had that it is somewhat logically fallacious. Okay? Because you're already assuming something and you're looking for evidence for it. And there is reasons to argue that may not be the best approach to acquire knowledge, but I'm not against it, the inductive method at all. But there's a stronger method, which is the hypothetical deductive method where you try to find disconfirmation. And this is when people say, well, scientists don't really do an experiment to find evidence for their argument. They try to find evidence against it, and if they can't, then they take the most likely hypothesis. They reject the null. That's more how experimental science does, because that's modus tollens approach. And modus tollens doesn't have the same problems with the affirming the consequent, because you're not assuming the what you're trying to prove. And so the falsificationism approach to science, I think, is a little bit stronger, but it's not something that has to be. It's just a virtue. But generally speaking, when somebody does an experiment, they're looking to say, here's what I think I expect from my result if my hypothesis is true, and if not true. And if I'm getting if I'm getting something that doesn't have reasons to accept the hypothesis, where I can reject the null, then I can't say that my hypothesis is more likely. That's experimental science. How do you think that we have accomplished all that we have accomplished by learning what we have learned in science? We've tested it, and minds do that. So this, do you guys see though the problem with presuppositional apologetics, the way he's going? It is 100% sophistry. 100% sophistry. Because he's not trying to understand Grayson's position. He's just saying, well, how if it's all deterministic, if your thoughts are deterministic, your proposition is deterministic, and your experiment's deterministic, then it's all deterministic. So how do you know anything? That's his argument.
I would like to clarify that that's not what I'm saying. I don't think that anything lies outside of cause and effect. In any
okay, cool. So if nothing...
I would disagree with it. There are things that lie outside cause and effect. But be that as may.
Lies outside of cause and effect. How do you have access to the truth of two propositions if whatever you come to, including testing, the conclusion of which would also be an effect of a set of cause, like a domino effect?
Why would that even matter, though? Let's say that it was strict determinism. You still get a result. You still apprehend that result. If I do an experiment and if that experiment is 100% deterministic, I still will get a result out of it, and I can still use that result to tell me that the proposition is true or not. So where's the argument? If it is deterministic and I do an experiment and I get some kind of result out of it, whether I recognize it deterministically or not, I still have a truth value. It is still true. I mean, I obviously it's not experimental science with my cup, but there's a truth value there. It's true that I have a cup in my hands. Okay, so what's the big deal? Whether my brain was deterministically getting to that conclusion that I have a cup in my hand or not should be absolutely irrelevant. The truth value is the same. The truth value is independent of the consciousness. The truth value is independent of the brain state. The truth value is independent of anything that I think, because it is called objectively true. You can see a cup. I can see a cup. We can all discover I have a cup here. You don't have to get into my mental states. You don't have to get into my brain and say, what is Steve's mental states? How is it affected by their physical states? It doesn't matter. You can look, you can see a cup. It's objectively true. That's what, by the way, objectivity means in philosophy, is that you can discover it. I can discover it. I don't need to tell you this is a cup. You don't need to know my thoughts. You can go, hey, I want to know if Steve has a cup in his hand. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to go look. And then you look at the cup. There's a direct causal relationship between that cup and your brain. That's how you justify it. And then you can say, I know that Steve has a cup in his hand. Because it is true. I have a cup in my hand. There's a truth maker there that makes the proposition true. You believe there's a cup in my hand. And then there's a direct causal relationship. It's not even justified true belief. It's called direct causal theory. And so you have knowledge. You have knowledge there's a cup in my hand because you have direct confirmation. That's how you acquire knowledge. When Jimbob and these skeptics say, well, how do you know something? That's how you justify it, atheist. That's one of the ways to justify. How do you know something? There, I just explained to you how I know a cup in my hand. That's perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with that. When they started getting into, well, a demon could be talking to your ear. Okay, but that's irrelevant. Could it be? Sure. But I'm explaining to you why I have the claim to knowledge. My claim to knowledge could be wrong. This is where the presupper really shines in their dishonesty. They want certainty. They want certitude. These things are not required for knowledge, nor do we have them in many things. There's only certain things we can have absolute certainty with, or even certainty in general. Not even have to be absolute in the Cartesian sense. I do think we have absolute certainty when it comes to identity, as far as something is doing the thinking. I can't assume I am thinking, because that's kind of a circular. But by me thinking, something is doing the thinking. It is tautological. There's no way I could be wrong in that. When I'm thinking, something is doing the thinking that I'm thinking. And I think that when it comes to certain things like laws of logic, those are generally metaphysical necessities. Therefore, you can't really be wrong in them. I can't be wrong that X equals X. I just can't. I'm certain of it. And so, again, hypothetically speaking, let's assume that our certainty was wrong. All we do is say, look, I thought I was certain, but I was wrong. I retract that claim. And that's really rare. Most times it's retract knowledge claims. There's nothing wrong with that. But the preceptor is really wanting to get the atheist to go, oh, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Are you certain about that? Irrelevant. Certainty is irrelevant to knowledge in most cases. It's called the weak case condition for knowledge. There are some philosophers in the past have argued to really have knowledge requires certainty. They're rare. That certainty implies knowledge implies certainty implies knowledge. Knowledge implies belief. I don't see a lot of that. It's really not even how we use the terms. To me, the weak acceptance case for knowledge is basically knowledge does not require certainty, but knowledge does imply belief, because knowledge is a subset of belief. So when we say, how do you justify knowing? When they ask, how do you know something? Well, I know it because it's true. I believe it. And then I'm justified. Then you explain those things. Well, how do you know it's true? Because I have a truth maker. This is what Grayson did. Oh, well, there's a truth maker that exists. Why do you know there's a cup in my hand? Because there's a condition that exists in the state of affairs of the universe that makes this true. Well, could you be wrong about that? Yeah, so what? Then I'll retract my claim to knowledge. Once I realize I'm wrong with that, once you can prove to me there's no cup there, I will change my claim. I will retract it and say, look, I was wrong about having knowledge. I had a false belief. False beliefs cannot be true, give you knowledge. Therefore, I'm retracting my claim to knowledge. Once you do that, I will change my position. So what? But they really want the atheist to try to pretend that, oh, well, you don't have certainty, therefore you can't know. So what? Show me that this is not a cup in my hand. I'll change my position and I'll say, look, I was wrong about having knowledge. I'll update my belief box. Does that make sense to you guys about how the presuppositionalist is trying to weaponize philosophy by this whole epistemic line of questioning? Does that make sense that you are answering their questions? When I've answered their questions, how do you know something? And they, well, are you certain about that? No. Oh, then you could be wrong. Yeah, so what? Big deal. Oh, then, I can't be wrong because I believe in God. Well, really? God gave you certainty. How did he do that? How did God give you certainty? Because that's a faith-based belief, But they're in the same boat, believe it or not. They're in the same exact boat. How do they account for knowledge? How do they justify knowledge? They have to use the same theories. Theories allow you to justify. That's what theories do. So when somebody says, well, how do you know something? You use a theory of knowledge. How do you know it's true? Use a theory of truth. How do you justify? Use a theory of justification. That's what they're for. That's what allows you to do it. And this is where, like I said, the preceptor just is so dishonest.
Why does it being part of a chain of cause and effect mean that it is not, like, that empirical testing is not reliable? I don't understand the logical argument
because the word reliability itself would be also an effect.
So what? Okay, so let's assume that our mind is 100% dependent on the physical. So what? It's still an effect. Now, the problem here is that Jimbob has not resolved one of the most fundamental aspects of philosophy of mind, the mind-body problem. It is not resolved. He doesn't have the solution. Grayson doesn't have the solution. I don't have the solution. And the big things on the philosophy of mind is, how is it, one, that the physical affects the mental? What's the relationship there? Physical things can affect physical things. I can pick this up, and my hand picks it up, and there's a physics there, and I can model it deterministically by physics. And deterministically in physics and determinism in philosophy of mind are related, but they're not exactly 100% the same thing to me. They're not 100% the same. There's obviously a relationship there, but determinism is more of a philosophy of mind thing than it is physics. But I have a physical action that picked up my mug. But how did the physics in my brain, how did the physicality in my brain affect something that is abstract? If the mental is abstract, because consciousness is abstraction, how did my mental state get changed? Some argue that the mental is a type of substance dualism, and that the physical substance can affect the mental substance. I don't believe that, but I mean, that's some people do accept substance dualism. But how? How does it do that? It's an abstraction. Can I affect the number 2? I can't push the number 2. I can't change the number 2. I have no influence. The number 2 is non-causal. It's acausal. There's nothing to it. It doesn't have. It's inert, causally inert. And the other thing for the problem with the mind-body problem is that how does the mental affect the physical? I can have all the thoughts in the world, but they're just thoughts. How does that thought translate it into me picking up my mug? The answer, no one freaking knows. This is one of the most fundamental things out there in philosophy of mind, the most unresolved problem. This is the core of philosophy of mind. There are, potential theories out there, but they don't actually fully explain anything. They all have issues. But Jimbob doesn't know either. His God doesn't get his solution either. You can posit God all you want. It doesn't explain the mind-body problem. So he's in the same boat. So even if all these things are deterministic and there's a causal relationship of your thoughts that are to the physicalist reduced to all physical things, because the physicalist says all things reduced to some kind of physical causation to some degree. Okay, which I don't necessarily hold by, but I can understand why the physicalist thinks this way. I do. But the problem is that there are even still what's called non-reductive physicalism, which says that the brain states don't fully map to the physical. In other words, if we knew all the physical states of the brain, we're still going to be able to predict what a person thought. We can get a good idea, but we wouldn't exactly. It's not a one-to-one correspondence. It's not what we call bijection of sets, but it's not where if I literally knew everything about the brain, I still could say, well, this person would be thinking this. It's non-reductive to physical states. And I think that's more along the lines of the case. And then, of course, people will appeal to like emergence, which he hates, where, the mind is an emergent property because it's an aggregate of neurons, an aggregate of the mind or the brain. But that doesn't resolve anything because, okay, sure, it's an emergent property, but why is that emergent property such that it is that way? It's a hard question. I mean, you can look at an aggregate of something like a material, and there's a color that comes out of it. There's a roughness that comes out of it. Look at like bismuth. When bismuth crystallizes, it makes these beautiful, intricate patterns, right? That's a property of bismuth. Okay, but that could be determined by physical properties that bismuth has. But it only comes into existence when you have a significant amount of bismuth to make that form. One atom of that is not going to do anything. It's an aggregate. That's emergence. And you can even argue, some people argue that my cup is an emergent form. The atoms came together and there's an emergence that came out where the form that it took was a cup. Because again, it's just atoms. If that's, then it goes back to metaphysical grounding. Right? The metaphysical grounding of why I have a cup in my hand, of why there's a cup, is the primitives have gotten together and formed that cup. It's a composite. But you got to remember, that's not causal. The atoms are not causing. There's no causality there. It's just the arrangement of the atoms. That's a metaphysical grounding. You guys see the subtle difference there? Metaphysical groundings tend to be non-causal. You're not looking for a causation. You're looking for an explanation. And there are certain properties with metaphysical groundings that I'm going to get into because I think it's important, because I don't think Jimbob understands that.
The experience of coming to reliability would be an effect.
So what?
How do you escape it?
So what?
Why does that require I don't understand what the problem is that it's a part of a cause and effect.
The problem is if you coming to a conclusion is an effect that's caused by something, then you don't have access to the true conclusion of anything.
Sure you do. Even if our brains have a causal relationship, what's the causation why you believed it? Because you evaluated the evidence. You have consciousness. I mean, Jimbob just thinks that mind doesn't exist or something, right? Even if it's 100% causal, you still evaluated the proposition. It's still true. You still came up with a truth value. Whatever. If I say, is it true that 1 + 1 = 2? Well, I can go look at math and see, 1 + 1 = 2. There's a truth value there. How I got there doesn't seem to be really of importance if the truth is the case, right? So even if it's deterministic, it's still a correct truth value. His truth value is the same as any other truth value for an objective fact. I mean, he might have a misunderstanding of it because he gets math wrong, right? Because he still doesn't understand the whole 0.9 I'm repeating equals 1. He will never figure that out. It's beyond his level. But Grayson and I, my audience, we understand why they're equal. So he has a false belief on that. But we all objectively can go look at math and say, oh, yes, I understand how a sequence or a series will get you to this equality, this relation, right? And it is a relationship. The equal sign is a relationship symbol. It's an equality symbol that relates two different sets, two different things, two kind of what's called equivalence principle, things that are in the one set relating to the other set. And the independency of that truth value is based upon an ontological status for a truth maker in the correspondence theory of truth. And that's exactly what Grayson's trying to explain to him. Now, Grayson doesn't have to have any in-depth understanding of it or read much about it, because what he said was just perfectly fine to answer Jimbob's question. Regardless of how he got to that truth value, whether it's completely deterministic or not, has no relevance to if the truth value is true or not. The truth value state does not change about how he got to that conclusion. It's independent of that. Would you guys agree?
Why not?
Why not?
Because whatever you come to is determined by a cause.
So what?
You have no outside independent access to knowledge.
Well, that's what does that even mean? Of course, we don't have access to anything external to our own mind. Our minds are internal. I can't access your mind. You can't access mine. Who cares? We can still come to the same conclusion that I have a cup in my hand. We both know we have a cup in our hand. My hand. Why? Because you can see it. That's the explanation. That's the justification. That's all you need. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's not that complicated. How do you know Steve has a cup in his hand? Because I have direct observation of it. That satisfies the condition for knowledge and justified true belief. Now, let's say that it wasn't a cup in my hand. Let's say it was something else in my hand. You just got lucky that it was a cup in my hand, like the Getty Air problems, like the fake barn problem. I have a whole bunch of fake cups, and I just happened to randomly pick one and happened to be the real cup, but it could have been a fake cup. Sure, that's possible. But then again, at that point, you just retract your thing of knowledge. Epistemic luck can't give you knowledge. But you can still make the claim until you realize that it's epistemic luck. I can still claim that this is a cup in my hand. And if you find out that it's not a cup in my hand and I've just keyed it in with some kind of program, I just made a composite CGI, then you change it. You just go, oh, yeah, you know what? I claimed that it was a cup in Steve's hand, but you know what? I found out later that it was CGI. And so I no longer make the claim that I know it. I was wrong about my claim. You don't have false knowledge, but you can have a false claim. You have a false belief. So what? That's how we have what's called belief revisionism. That's what we all do as humans. That's critical thinking. That's how you critically think. You change your position given more information. As you acquire new knowledge, you give it. And Jimbob's like, well, how do you acquire new knowledge if you don't have any access to the external thing? We have access to the external world by observations. That's what Grayson was trying to point out. Our observations are literally how we observe reality. Now, is it perfect? No. Is it always reliable? No. But it is reliable to the point where we can pragmatically use things like science and beliefs to function in society. If I didn't believe that gravity didn't exist day after day, I would like constantly like scared that all of a sudden gravity is going to stop working. I could not live my life. And he doesn't believe in gravity, by the way, I found out, which is weird. I don't know. His views on gravity are weird. John asks, sorry, Steve, what do you think Jimbob meant by outside independent access to knowledge? I have no clear. Well, yeah, it was a little bit of word salad to me, too. That's what I said. I'm trying to steelman him, John. I am trying to steelman him. But I really don't know what he meant by that, because if I had to steelman, let's say we have like the group of all things that are knowable. And he's saying, well, we're inside that group that we can say that we know things maybe, but how do you come from an objectively outside, like an ideal, like ever heard of the ideal observer theory? Ideal observer theory would be how would be an outside person that's outside of you and everything else looking in, how would their observation, what would their observation be? And I think that's what he's asking. He's like, well, the only true independent observation that's outside everything would be his version of God. So if I had a steelman him, he'd be like, God is the only one that has outside independent access to knowledge. He knows all things that are knowable. And without God, there would be no ability to have any knowledge because he's the only being that can access everything. That's the best it's not straw man. The best steelman I can come up with, John. Does that make sense? That's the best I can do with his word salad. Let me know, John, if that makes sense to you, or am I speaking bollocks too? That's fine.
I don't understand how that follows from the premises.
Okay,
it doesn't.
Let's do it.
The reason why Grayson doesn't understand it because it doesn't follow. That's why nobody can understand this stuff. When you start using terminologies differently than how they do in philosophy and different in evolution and all these different sciences, nobody's going to understand what you're saying. These questions some of them are just unanswerable because they're just word salad. They have no answer to them because they make no sense. It's like, what does the color purple smell like? There's no answer to it because it's a nonsensical question. And when you start using terms like determinism, start using these terms that are completely different than or metaphysical accounting or grounding, different than how somebody in philosophy would be using them, then because the very first thing he said, and I don't know if you guys heard it, but he said something along the lines of somewhere in here, and maybe I didn't play it, I don't know. I thought I did, but he said something like, no atheist has ever been able to explain this, or this. And the reason for that is because no atheist or theist can explain what he's asking for because his questions make no sense. In his mind, he's thinking he knows what he's talking about. He's like, no atheist has ever been able to answer these things. Well, one, either A, they're unanswerable so far and nobody has to answer, or two, your questions make no sense to anyone for them to answer. Of course, an atheist is not going to be able to answer. Hey, look, if I said, hey, guys, you know what? None of you atheists out there can answer what the color purple smells like. Yeah, no kidding. Is that a defeater or anything? Does that defeat atheism? But that's the rhetoric that he's using. No atheist has ever been able to explain to me what the color purple smells like. It's the same sophistry.
But again, a brain, not even a being, not a mind, a brain is a machine, a biological machine.
Okay.
It produces a proposition that comes in the form of words out of a mouth, right? A statement. Another brain.
Well, again, the thought and the statement are not the same thing, right? Statement, the locution, the act and speech act theory, the speaking of it is an act that's stating something. And merely because you state something doesn't necessarily mean that you have an onus to prove it, to demonstrate it, to argue it, to have a conversation about it, or even believe it. When an actor says something, he doesn't believe what he's saying, right? Because he's in character. Just because you say something does not attach inherently any obligation or onus to do anything. It's just you're making a statement. If I want to try to convince you my statement's true, then I have what's called a persuasive burden of persuasion. If I want to have a dialectic with you or discussion, I have discursory burdens. If I believe my proposition or statement, then I have an epistemic burden to myself. But just making a statement, it's just that. It's just a statement. All propositions are statements. Not all statements are propositions. So what? But there's the act of making the statement, and there's the thought. But the proposition itself is just a statement about the truth value of something. And that truth value is going to be true or false, independent of your belief. John says your steelman does make sense, but if that's actually Jimbob's position, it's meaningless. It's yet another assertion dressed up in philosophy sounding language. That's what I'm saying. Welcome to internet presuppositional apologetics. This is the game they play. This is why they think they're undefeated, because they don't make any sense. To people the philosophers that go against presuppositional apologists, the philosophers always win because they can explain to the audience the topic the audience wants to learn, while the presuppers just having ridiculously fallacious, ridiculously sophistic, nonsensical questions that have nothing to do with actual philosophy. Nothing to do with it at all. Again, his understanding of determinism, I think, is wrong. I think his understanding of moral epistemology is wrong. I think his understanding of groundings, metaphysical groundings, is wrong. I think he's wrong in all of these things. I mean, but when you start with bad reasoning, when your foundations are wrong, this leads you to things like flat Earth, dome theory, young Earth creationism. If your foundations are off, it's going to lead you to things that do not comport with reality. When you start arguing against evolution, you're arguing against reality. You're just arguing. Now, if you want to say that I want to believe that God exists and the earth is young, and I take that as a faith-based belief, okay, whatever. But once you start saying that science is wrong, then you need to come with some actual argument and evidence, which they don't have. But I really think that because his foundations are flawed, that he leads himself to these false conclusions. And yet he'll project that on other people. Oh, it's the atheist that has bad foundations. Let's attack their foundations. You can attack all my foundations all you want, but I guarantee you my foundations are exactly the same as anybody else's, except his has more. He has more foundations than I do. He's amplified his entities, so to speak. The law of parsimony, the Occam's razor. He's added more axioms that I don't need with this whole God and Earth being young and he thinks he literally thinks space is filled with superfluid helium. Don't ask me. I'm not even joking. You're going to have all these radical beliefs. You're going to have all these conspiratorial beliefs. If you don't have a solid understanding of how to properly critical think, this is what you end up with. And yet they're going to project that onto the interlocutor. They're going to project it on somebody like Grayson, who's very good at critical thinking. I've been highly impressed watching him. We had a great time last night. The dude is super sharp, super smart. He's articulate. He's a great science communicator. I think he's going to do exceptionally well on YouTube. And I've said that before. Have I not told you who I think is going to do well and who's not? And I've been right almost all of them, because I can tell who knows what the hell they're talking about, who doesn't, who could communicate and who doesn't. And that doesn't mean that Jimbob won't do well. There's a lot of channels I think that are absolutely, morbidly stupid. Jeranism had a big channel, and he's a flat earther. So the size of your channel isn't a measure of the verticality of your information. But again, this is going back to your core axioms. And I think that his core axioms are so whacked that this is leading him to these types of presuppositional nonsense, because anybody could tell him that, hey, look, people have been doing this for years, and people stopped doing it because they got tired of getting their ass handed to them when they actually talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about, when you actually talk to a real philosopher. I love watching the real philosophers talk to the preceptors. Oh my God, it's brutal. It's better than any flat earth debate by far. Go listen to like Malpass talk to a preceptor. It's mwah.
Says another statement. Now, from your view, both of those events are caused by the brain.
Yep.
Caused.
Well, again, are they 100% causal relationship? That's we don't know. Is it influenced? Yes, but I don't know if we can actually map the mental states completely to the physical states. I don't think we can. I tend to non-reductive physicalism, which is not the same as like I'm not a physicalist, but I do think that the brain is a physical thing. The mind is a separate property that comes out of the brain. It's a separate property. It's a property dualism. That is the most common understanding. I don't know what Jimbob's position is. I don't know if he's a substance dualist. But under property dualism, it's still a monastic. It's still a monism. It's still one substance, the physical. And out of that physical substance, somehow the mental states come about. But that doesn't mean we don't have mental states. That doesn't mean we can't choose things. That doesn't mean that the mental has to be 100% reducible to the physical. We don't know. And even if it did, how does it do it? That's the mind-body problem. How does it do that? How does it map? Because everybody out there who's ever had set theory, you understand mapping relationships, right? Do you guys remember between sets, you have a bijection, surjection, and injection? So if you have a bijection, which is a surjection and injection, then you have a one-to-one correspondence between two sets. That's kind of the approach that I kind of look at from the philosophy of mind. Can the brain map to the mind map to the brain, whether it be a bijection or not? I don't think it really makes that much difference. It could be some kind of surjection that everything at least has some kind of correspondence, but one thing could correspond to two things. Because a bijection, if you remember, is a one-to-one, but a surjection, you can have a set that points to one element of the set that can go to two other elements in the other set on the codomain. And so whether it's a surjection or bijection, or even an injection, maybe you just have some, well, no, so you couldn't have an injection because then you have an element in the second set that's completely independent of the first, so we want to map it all. But be that as may, I don't know how we can really determine that the brain maps 100% to the mind and the mind maps 100% to the brain. Again, that's the big mystery of the mind-body problem. You guys are awfully quiet in live chat.
So that means the propositions themselves are at the effect of the cause, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if both propositions are at the effect of the cause, then the observer who's trying to get to the bottom of which proposition is true or false, their methodology to coming to the truth is also just an effect of something.
So again, so what? If I evaluate a proposition like the cup is in Steve's hand, if Jimbob evaluates it and Grayson evaluates it, we all should come to the same conclusion. Whether mine was completely 100% deterministic, whether Grayson's was partly deterministic and partly by choice and deliberation, whether Jimbob's is completely free choice, libertarian free will, or whatever, we could have very, very different philosophical views on how we came to that conclusion. But the rational conclusion is that I have a cup in my hands. So why does it matter how we got there? That's philosophy. The philosophy is, okay, how did we get there? We might have different views of how we got there. I can believe it 100% deterministic. I had no control of it whatsoever. Let's believe that. Let's believe that it is 100% robotic. I'm just an automaton. As Descartes would say, an automaton. I'm a philosophical zombie. I still got the right conclusion. It is true that I had a cup in my hand. So what the hell is the reason to even argue this? Why even bring this up to Grayson? What is he expecting Grayson to try to justify at this point? Because he's really trying to get him to do what's, like I said, a metaphysical grounding. But again, that he's not understanding what a metaphysical grounding is. He's just trying to say, look, how is it that, you can evaluate this proposition? Because you have the ability to deliberate. Well, that's just causal. That's just all causal. Okay, but what made him make a decision then? What caused him to believe what he believed? Jimbob has beliefs. Did not something cause him to have that belief? Or is it 100% random? Does he, I just have a thought. No, there's reasons why he had a thought. It is influenced by something. It doesn't have to have a direct causal relationship as far as causality, but there's influence there. But to the physicalist, there is some kind of causal relationship, but we don't know how. We don't know. We don't understand that causal relationship. But Jimbob doesn't either. John says, I'd love to know what Jimbob thinks about God being a perfect observer of a system that is not impacted by the cause and effect of the system, how he impacts the uncertainty principle. Well, I guess that God, the uncertainty principle doesn't, apply to God. God can know the exact position and momentum of a particle at any given time. God can know the exact energy and time of a particle. Both of them are Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. God can understand wave functions in the Schrödinger's time-dependent equation. Can God perfectly observe both position and momentum simultaneously? God, I guess God wouldn't be limited by that, right? But the problem with that is that that would be a complete violation of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, because Heisenberg's uncertainty principle means that there's no information to be had there. It's not just we are lacking information to make a determinacy to have 100% certainty of the position and momentum. It is that when you it's a fact of reality. The more precise you are in the wave function to determine the position, the more ambiguity you have in the momentum, and vice versa. This is a fact of that wave function. If I want to do an observation and that wave function collapses, and I get the portion out of that wave function that tells me the position, I've lost information on the momentum. It's not there. It's just not there. There is no information anymore. That wave function's collapsed. It's gone. It's indeterminate. This is the whole principle behind quantum mechanics, that we can never know the exact position and momentum of a particle at the same time, because the more you know about one, the less you know about the other. It's in a state of affairs of the universe that's immutable. So what is it that how can God know something that is unknowable? Because theists would always posit God can only know what's knowable. God can only know what is there to be known. If something is unknown, not just to us because it's off limits to us, but is unknowable because it's a fundamental law of physics, how can God know that then? God has to be susceptible to those same indeterminacies for the universe that he created, because there's no information in there to be known. Does that make sense, John? I mean, again, now we're getting really deep in the weeds here, because we're migrating to quantum stuff. But I mean, to me, it makes sense that a God can't know something that is unknowable. There's no information there to know. Then what is it that God knows? What is it God knows about the exact position and momentum of a particle? When it's not just, again, we don't understand, is there's nothing there to be had. A particle is only a perturbation in a wave that we have measured by observation. Once we make that observation, we see the particle, but there's no particle there to observe unless it's been measured. And how that waveform, how the wave function collapses is the measurement problem. But God's not going to know every single particle because there's no particle there yet. Unless he's observing everything, then there should be particles popping out everywhere, I mean, am I way off here? Am I? Anybody?
In a causal chain. Okay.
I agree.
So, okay, if you agree, then agreeing, you're just at the effect of some cause in your brain, right?
Yep.
You're not actually reasoning or thinking because you're just at the effect of something.
No, you're still reasoning. You still have the ability to reason. He's confusing determinism with self-determinism. There is something in that allows for self-determinism, self-conscious thought in determinism theory for the determinist. That doesn't mean we cannot reason. The agent in determinism is still allowed to have thought. You're still allowed to reason. It's not just pure mechanistic where it's an algorithm where you're 100% predicted to have this end result. But the determinists will argue that if you can know all possible counter conditions, every possible counterfactual, every possible alternate possibility, then the hard determinist would say, I can determine what the outcome will be. I can determine what the thought would be. That would be a hard deterministic approach. It doesn't mean that you have to have that outcome. It just means that the determinist could determine all possibilities if you knew everything about the state of affairs of the universe, which I think is demonstrably false. You cannot know every possible state of affairs of the universe because there's just not that much information that can be processed in finite time. There's a limitation to the 10 to the 120 power of information. Only in theory, I guess, an infinite being could. That's why he posits God. But even then, how can an infinite being process something in finite time? So there's still a lot of problems there. But again, just because something is deterministic with causal relationships doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to reason. I mean, how does Jimbob reason? How does positing a God change our ability to reason? God is external to us if God exists. God is not in our head. Well, I mean, unless you're an atheist and they say it's all imaginary, right? But I mean, if for the theist who believes that God is an external agent, how does that change how we reason? Do I not reason the same as Jimbob or Grayson? I mean, sure, maybe hopefully do a little better, but I mean, we still go through the same thought process. Positing a God is not going to make any difference there. And just because that one person holds to some kind of form of determinism, generally soft determinism, aka compatibilism, that allows for that. That allows for us to have the ability to reason. He's, like you said, his belief is that all atheists, being determinist and not accepting libertarian free will or being physicalist, think it's like a DVD player. That the DVD player, no matter how many times you watch that movie, is going to be the exact same thing. Right? It's already been predetermined. The future's already been predetermined. I don't believe that. I don't believe the future's been predetermined. But the determinists will argue, well, if you could know everything about everything, then you could determine what the future would be. That's true. If you could know everything about the situation and you know all counter possibilities, the determinists, you should be able to predict everything, how the future will exactly play out. But also that information is more than the universe can actually store. That information is more than the universe can actually store in the finite amount of time. So therefore, no determinist could ever make those statements that Even if they know something, it could predict the future. Why? Because there's not enough information to do so. There's always going to be underdeterminacy there. So I think hard determinism is false. I compatibilist it. And I think that he just thinks that all atheists think that everything is 100% mechanistic, which to me, I don't know anybody who thinks that way. I don't know any atheist that thinks that way. Zach said he is live ranting about atheists and emergence again currently, rather than being around you reasonable folk here where I can learn something. Oh, I appreciate it. Well, I mean, Zach, have you in this particular stream, have you learned something? I mean, honestly, have I talked about anything that somebody has learned something from when we talked about determinism? And again, I'm going to get into metaphysical grounding a little bit more, but I think the biggest thing from metaphysical grounding is that it's a non-causal relationship that has certain properties, which I haven't even got into yet.
I don't think that follows. I mean,
it doesn't. No,
for example, you can like program a machine with like following
with a mind
logic, and then it can go through a logical process without having any kind of agency or free will involved.
Correct.
Can you program a machine to come up with the wrong conclusions?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the machine is at the mercy of another machine called the human brain, right?
Uh-huh.
So what's in question is, how is it that a machine has access to epistemology?
Because we have a mind that the machine doesn't have. This is not that complicated, Jimbob. Why is he so confused by this? We are not just biological machines. We have something called consciousness. This is why there's been so many years of papers and study on this particular topic. We are unique in the universe in that aspect. Consciousness can be considered to be what's called sui generis, which means that it's something into itself, a unique thing to itself, consciousness. Or sui generis. And that just means you can think of it as a one-of-a-kind thing, but everybody's collective consciousness is a very unique thing. Consciousness. Why is it that we are self-aware? Why is it that animals have some kind of consciousness? Why is it that consciousness exists? It is a unique thing in the universe that non-organic material doesn't seem to have, unless you're panpsychism, right? But why? Why is it that we as organic beings, because we're carbon-based, why is it that configurations of these atoms and these primitives that arrange itself in a cup that forms a cup that we call a cup, that has a function. But that cup doesn't have any consciousness. Again, excluding panpsychism. But our brains do. What is it about our brains, about the configuration of the primitives of the atoms that form into molecules, that form into neurons and gray matter and white matter? What is it about that structure that allows for consciousness? It is a really poignant question. It is a question deserving of some thought. And it is, I got to tell you, that is something that, theists have at least a decent argument to talk about, because it's an important question to everybody, both atheist and theist. What is it that makes us special that we have consciousness? And the theist will posit, because God gave that to us. Okay, well, I don't think it explains anything, but that, it's not incoherent. Not explanatory, but it's not incoherent. But at least they're recognizing that there's something unique about us. There's something unique about life that has the ability to have consciousness from things that just are inert because they're carbon-based. I mean, you put a bunch of carbon together, you can get a diamond, you can get coal. But coal and diamonds are not something that have thoughts. We have intentional states. We have intentional states. We are an agent that exists that has intentional states. And other non-living things don't have those. Why? That's when it goes into metaphysical grounding. What is the metaphysical grounding of why we have mental states? That's why it gets into the philosophy of mind. What is the grounding for that? Is it just the arrangement of the atoms in the brain? The atoms in the brain got together. They went to this specific configuration, just like the form here that forms a cup. That's functionalism. It functions as a cup. But did they get together in such a way that the laws of the universe said, look, if the atoms got together in your brain in a special way, in this one specific way, it's now going to have consciousness. If it comes together in a diamond, it's not going to. So what is about the laws of the universe that are such that allows for the mental states to arise from the physical, whether it be emergent or supervenience or whatever you want to believe, it still exists. And that's why I think Jimbob goes off the rail. Trying to explain why we have mental states is very complicated. But what's not in question is if we have the mental states to begin with, unless you're what's called a eliminativist. The eliminativist believes that our whole understanding of mental states is wrong. That there are no such thing as mental states. And I think it's a really kind of strange position. I don't think it holds much water. But there's something called, like I said, eliminativism. But for the rest of us, we do believe that we have mental states. But why? That's a very difficult question. But he's in the same boat. Jimbob's in the exact same boat.
The calculator doesn't have access to...
Oh, I can make this into a panel, John. Yeah, I can make this a panel when I'm done. Let me get back 5 more minutes, and then I'll bring you in.
The epistemology. The calculator is designed to produce outcomes, right, consistent with the laws of logic. I'm saying if our use of the laws of logic and thinking and reasoning is all determined like a calculator,
it's not.
Because the calculator has no access to knowledge.
We do, though.
It just does its thing. We don't either.
We do have access to knowledge. Jimbob, listen to my words. Go read about theories of knowledge. Justified true belief. Justified true belief plus, which uses possible world theory with truth tracking conditions such as safety or sensitivity. Go read about direct causal theory. Go read about pragmatic theory. Go read about semantic theories. These are all theories of what it means. Even consensus theory of truth or knowledge. Science is a consensus theory of knowledge. Science is a consensus theory of knowledge. Can you say that something is true, that you know something, is because science has concluded it. I got to sneeze. One second. So when somebody says, well, how do you know that the earth goes around the sun? Why? Because science has concluded this. Or whatever it is about science, that justifies your knowledge. Could you be wrong on that? Yes. Has scientists been wrong before? Yes. But that doesn't matter. You retract the claim to knowledge if you find out it's wrong. But that's a different question. When the presupper asks you, how is it you justify your knowledge, and it's based upon science, the fact that it is a scientific fact by consensus of the experts is sufficient justification to make a claim of knowledge. The presupper doesn't have to like that. They can balk at that all they want. But the rest of people in society that understand these concepts, that want to be rational, they will go, that's what they mean. This is what they mean by this. This is what they mean by justifying. There's nothing wrong with that. The presupper doesn't understand. There's nothing wrong with that. When you defer to science and the science you can show is correct, you are justified to claim knowledge. Even if just for a pragmatic reason. I don't have to understand Bernoulli's equation to understand that if I see a plane flying, the plane's flying. I don't have to know crap about science. I can just look, there's a plane flying. Do I have to understand how it flies? No, but how do you know it's flying? Because I can see it. How do you justify that? Because I can see it. Or how do you know how do you know that how do you know how it flies? Oh, because I know how it flies because I took the sciences. I understand aerodynamics a little bit. I understand about lift. I understand about thrust. I understand how wave designs of wings where you get the max amount of lift, which by the way could be a little confusing. Bernoulli's principle about the airfoil, but whatever. But I mean, I do flight simulators. I like flying around in a little Cessna. But how do you justify that? Well, because you can look at the equations. That's how you justify stuff. Don't let the presupper confuse you like that when you get these discussions. Don't let them ramble about how you know something. Once they ask you how you know something, you tell them you've answered their question. You've answered their question completely if they give you a sufficient amount of time to answer, what they never do.
So if your assumption is that human beings are mechanisms, mechanisms don't produce knowledge.
Yeah, so the difference between like the calculator that's programmed with the laws of rationality and us is that we have senses that sense the world around us. A calculator doesn't.
Yeah, yeah, and he was playing that stupid music, but Grayson's exactly right. We have senses. The calculator does not sense reality. The calculator has no input, has no sensory data, no sense data. That's what it's called, sense data. We do. We have sense data. We have something the calculator does not have, and we have theories to say what is knowledge. When Jimbob's talking about knowledge, what the hell is he even talking about if he's not talking about some theory of knowledge? He's talking about this obscure word to him, knowledge, but he has no understanding what knowledge even means in philosophy. He has no idea what a philosopher would mean by, oh, I know P, or I know that P. I guarantee it. I guarantee it, if you ask Jimbob what it means to say that S knows that P, he would have absolutely no idea. Do you guys know? Does anybody in my audience know what that means if I say S knows that P? I'm going to tell you, but I'm just kind of curious, and I'm going to open it up, John. I just want to play 1 or 2 more minutes, and I want to show something about metaphysical grounding.
Right. That's why when you went to the calculator, it's a poor analogy because we designed the calculator to do exactly what we want it to. And the fact that we can design it to do incorrect things means we have access to knowledge. Now, from you.
Right. We have access to knowledge because we have sense data and we recognize that we programmed the calculator wrong. Cha-ching! Did the penny drop yet there, Jimbob?
Your view that humans are just calculators.
Nobody's arguing this.
And a calculator can produce false conclusions. Yeah. I'm asking you, what's your methodology to determine whether a conclusion is true or false?
He already answered this. The methodology is I look and observe. Again, do you see the sophistry here? What is your methodology? Well, let's see here. I posit a proposition that Steve has a cup in his hand. Oh, I have direct causal input. I see the cup. The cup is putting in my brain that I'm seeing it. I'm justified. The proposition is true, and I believe it. So nobody knew what S. Okay, so when I say S knows that P, it means it makes the conditions for justified true belief, or whatever theory. But if I say S knows that P, that means that S knows that it's true because it is true. They believe it, and it's justified. It meets the conditions. So I can say that I know there's a cup in my hand. What's your methodology? I looked. Direct causal theory. What else do you need to answer? What else is there to answer? How does that not fully answer the question?
Right. Again, I agree that brains can produce false statements or claims.
Yeah, you just correct yourself.
Test them with empirical measurement or observation or experiment.
Okay, if testing itself, the very activity, is determined by cause, how do you know you're properly testing?
Because you're getting a result. It's still getting a result, whether it's been deterministic or not, whether somebody's forcing you to do it, you have no free agency, whatever the reason is, you still got a result. That result tells you the state of affairs. That's about as far as I don't want to go in this video.
Because I would just define truth as that which comports with reality. I agree that this.
And there's nothing wrong with that, Grayson. And by the way, correspondence theory of truth is not the only theory of truth out there. There's other ones. But for this type of argument, that's sufficient. Even R and Ra is right on that. Because his philosophy is not that great. But yeah, what is the truth maker that makes the proposition true? That it is the state of affairs that is the case. That's it. That's all you got to do. Period. That's it. All right. So let me close this real quick. I got to the 10 minutes. I think I hopefully kind of answered Grayson's call to kind of steelman Jimbob, and I think I did. If not, well, whatever. Because again, it's gobbledygook. It's just so much gobbledygook. But I'm trying to make the best I can out of the word salad that he has, because again, he doesn't use these terms like I've ever read in the literature. You have to really read into his own special private language. And I noticed that with all presuppers. They all have their own private special language. So let me, 1 sec. I'm going to make a link and get you in here, John. All right, if you want to come in, John, there's the link. I'll pin it. And then I'll show you guys. Web browser. Let's see here. I already had an input for this. One sec. Hi, John.
Hello.
I'm trying to get you in here real quick so they can see you. Oh, you're not even having camera.
Evening.
So man. Yeah, you're not.
No, I'm still in my work clothes, Steve.
Yeah,
I'm not pretty to look at right now.
I'm not gonna bother with that. So let me show this real quick, and then I'll get your feedback on it. But I wanted to show this to my audience here because I think it's important, and then I'll show it to you.
Oh, one sec.
And you're looking on the outside, you'll see it come up. Okay, so when we're talking about metaphysical groundings, there has to be certain relationships that would be constitutive of a metaphysical grounding. And this is the only one I could find that's kind of related to it, but these are not what the conditions would be. Matter of fact, two of them are completely opposite. But in math theory, when you're talking about sets, you have what's called relations. And relationships are basically a codomain to a domain. A set, you have a set of something, then you have a relationship to that set. So when it says something like, let R be in a relationship on set A, that means that, like, for example, of all the real numbers, and I take an ordered pair, 1, 1, that is a relation to the set. Okay? So that's all it's saying. So there's a property out there for set theory called reflexive. And this is what I went over with him the other day in one of my hangouts where I was talking about, and he didn't understand these concepts. But reflexive is saying that for all of X, when you have an ordered pair, X equal X, it's going to be in that relationship to the set. So an ordered pair 1, 1 is reflexive. Okay? X equal X is reflexive. But the fun thing about grounding, when you talk about metaphysical grounding, is irreflexive, meaning that you cannot be self-referential when you're trying to do a grounding. A grounding cannot ground itself. A metaphysical grounding cannot... Go ahead.
Colloquially, sort of essentially, it becomes a circular argument.
Correct. That's why to have a grounding, a more metaphysical grounding, which again is not just a justification. It's a little bit more complicated. To have a metaphysical grounding that these guys ask for, what they call the word accounting. When you hear a preceptor says, how do you account for that? What they're asking for is a metaphysical grounding. And to have
so I mean,
go ahead.
There's a huge amount of gray area on the go in these sort of discussions, because you've got sort of the notion of a circular argument, an axiomatic assumption, something that is grounded. These things, they can all sound very similar and be easily confused, especially when you've got somebody like a presupper that's firing out these fucking word salads.
Yeah, but do you think that again, when we're talking about metaphysical grounding, when I'm talking about the relationships for sets, I don't think Jimbob would have a freaking clue. Right?
No, unlikely.
Okay, so
my issue with Jimbob's argument was the fact that obviously he's a presuppositionalist, so his position is God or some variation thereof. But my issue with Jimbob is that he seems to be making the assumption that the only possible other option is the most extreme version of physical reductionism or determinism,
right?
Or a combination of the two, on behalf of the atheist or the agnostic,
which nobody posits. I don't know any atheist
which wasn't being posited in this discussion, and very, very, very few people do. Mm-hmm. Because there are still a huge number of atheists and agnostics that, that don't hold to that extreme physical reductionist or deterministic position.
And neither does Grayson.
Neither do I.
Yeah, so this is what I'm saying. Jimbob just has one big straw man.
It was a big straw man, but it's also the case that from Jimbob's position, the person that he's arguing against, or that he thinks he's arguing against, is actually a very difficult I would make the argument that based on his own position, he knows that what he's arguing against isn't feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Because just as he was talking about, like, a deterministic universe. Sorry, I've got a beagle next to me that's growling. In a deterministic, so he was talking about. I'll be interested to know what Jimbob makes of the argument. If I asked him the question, okay, if the universe is your position is that without God, the universe is deterministic. If the universe exists and we don't have God, you're assuming that your interlocutor is deterministic in the sense that in hard determinism. That seemed to be his position. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So in hard determinism, that means that human brains are basically difference engines. They're not. What we perceive as our consciousness is an illusion.
Yes.
The brain is a difference engine. So in a deterministic world, a human brain couldn't be wrong.
I don't know what it would mean. I see. Here's the thing. What would it even mean to be right or wrong?
But humans are wrong all the time.
Yes.
So what I mean is, like, a billiard table is a deterministic environment. A pool ball travels in a particular direction at a particular velocity with a particular momentum
based
and energy.
Upon elastic collisions. Any elastic
collisions. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So could one of those billiard balls end up in a position that it wasn't supposed to be in?
Yes, theoretically. You're talking about it's still a metaphysical possibility. Is it going to be happening? No, because it's basic. Once you've hit that ball, it's all mechanistic after that. Yeah.
So the fact that we have people who come to the conclusion that the Earth is fucking flat, to me, that is a demonstration that we don't live in a deterministic universe. Because if we lived in a deterministic universe, the conclusion that they would come to would be that
unless they're predetermined, unless there's for whatever reason their deterministic path took them to a false belief. But the thing that is unique about
the deterministic path to come to a false belief, that how do you, in a deterministic universe, how do you import the concept of something that isn't? The Earth isn't flat,
right? Because
where did that come from?
They were just determined to get a false belief. I have no idea. I could not even venture a guess how they think that's possible. What makes it so deterministic that they're going to end up with a false belief? But the big thing about having an agency is that we can influence the universe, something that a non-agent cannot do. This cup can only influence non-intentional states. The gravity of this cup influences the universe, but it's not intentional. We have the ability to have intentional states to influence the universe, which is very unique. Nowhere else in the universe that we know of, is anywhere but Earth, is there something that exists that has intentional states that can influence the universe, that can make a change in it, by decision. That's philosophy, right?
Well, yeah, of course, and it leads to all sorts of discussions around moral theory and the is-ought distinction, and without beings or entities with agency, almost all of those discussions are totally meaningless. They have no.
We've explained to him that before. Moral theory is because we're moral agents, because we're societal-based creatures. This is where moral theory comes from. How do you account for moral theory? Society. That is the moral. That is the grounding.
Well, it's also, you were having a discussion with Ozian the other day, and you were talking about the problem of evil, and you were saying, and Ozian, I think he actually misunderstood your position. You were arguing that hurricanes and tornadoes and being struck by lightning is evil. But you were arguing, as in, if God doesn't exist, it's not evil. If God does exist, it's evil because God could have prevented it, and it was totally unnecessary.
Under Rowe's definition.
Yeah.
Because God didn't intervene, right?
Yeah, basically. But that would. It's only evil. You need the two moral agents. You need God, and you need the person suffering.
Under the evidential problem, evil. I personally still would call them evil for other reasons, because I'm what's called evil revivalist. But be that as may.
If God doesn't exist, an entity without agency
then technically evil wouldn't exist when it comes to the evidential theory of evil.
Yeah.
Or evidential problem.
Well, obviously I agree with that. But what I mean is you're stating that, so now I'm interrogating your worldview. So your worldview is that you're not convinced, you have an indeterminate position on the existence of God.
Right. But I still accept there's evil in the world.
But you like a hurricane flattening somebody's house is evil.
Well, it's a natural
even though the hurricane
evil.
doesn't have.
Right.
It's a natural evil.
Right.
But the hurricane in this instance doesn't have agency, correct. And there was no moral agent that could potentially had the power to stop the hurricane. Correct. But your position is that because there is a person on the receiving end of the
harm,
detrimental position. So, see, my position is I think that in order for something to be evil, you need moral agents on both ends.
Yeah, no, I get that, but it's the same reason why we have for assurance policy an act of God, right? This was caused by an act of God. It doesn't mean there's an actual act of God there. It just means there's a natural occurrence. So it's semantics. It literally the word semantics.
I would recommend that both you, Steve, and everybody else listening watches the film "The Man Who Sued God."
I think I have seen that.
Excellent film.
Yeah. So let me wrap this up with the whole thing I have on the screen here. Because I think it's important. We're talking about more, when we're talking about accounting. So this is what the preceptor loves to talk about. Like, how do you know that? How do you account for that? How as an atheist to account for that? I want to explain to the atheists how you account for these things by answering their questions, because they don't even know what the hell they're asking. That's the biggest problem I have with preceptors. Is I don't know of any preceptor that's ever, to me, demonstrated they even know what the hell they're even asking. So when we're talking about metaphysical groundings, these are the properties that it should have. Well, actually, these aren't the properties it should have. It should actually have irreflexivity. It cannot be reflexive. In other words, a grounding cannot ground to explain itself. 2, symmetric. And what this means is for every relationship where you have for all of X, Y, X, Y is an element of this set, there's a relationship that for that X will relate to Y and Y relate to X. That would mean that every grounding can, for every explanation to another explanation, would have to be symmetrical, but they're not in a grounding. The grounding means that this is explained by this, but this is not explained by this. It's asymmetrical. So for to be a metaphysical grounding, it has to be irreflexive, has to be asymmetrical so far. And then the last one is transitive. And the transitive property is saying that for all X and Y, Z in A, if there's a relationship between X and Y and the relationship between Y and Z, there's a relationship between X and Y. That's transitivity. In other words, if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A has to equal to C. That actually holds.
Yeah.
That actually holds for metaphysical grounding.
And a really, I mean, obviously, we talk to death the distinction that knowledge is a subset of belief. Mm-hmm. So obviously, if you know something, then you both know and believe it. But if you believe something, you could potentially, you obviously believe it, but you may not know it.
Right. And
so this is the distinction between these two states that you're talking about.
Yeah. Same thing
so
here.
all knowledge must be grounded in belief. But
yes.
Belief isn't grounded in knowledge.
Well, yeah. Let's use 3 things. So let's use like.
But people misunderstand that, because if you know something, you must believe it.
Well, and let's explain the transitive property here. We have 3 things, right? A equals B, B equals C.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. So let's use certainty, knowledge, and belief.
Yeah.
There's a transitive property there. If you believe something, it doesn't mean that you know it, but there's a transitivity there that if you have certainty, it's transitive that you also believe and you know it as well.
Yeah.
So if certainty means that you prove that you believe it, if you have certainty, it's transitive that the belief is there. That's the transitive property. So if you have the certainty, all the other ones have to follow. There has to be a relationship.
So as an example of something that hits all 3 properties, I am certain that 2 + 2 = 4. I believe that 2 + 2 = 4, and I know that 2 + 2 = 4. So that hits all 3 states. Whereas something like evolution, you could I would make the argument that I don't have certainty on evolution, but I both believe and know it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and so I just want the audience out there to understand that when you're asking for a metaphysical grounding or accounting, this is kind of what they're asking for. Again, I couldn't find anything that had reflexive and asymmetric and transitive, so this is the best screenshot I can get. Because again, you don't want reflexivity in your metaphysical grounding, because something cannot justify itself, or something can't ground itself. But again, you have to. The big takeaway I want from people to get on this video is that groundings are non-causal, and I think this is where the presupper goes wrong. We don't want a causal explanation. We don't want to how do you know that the billiard ball's scattered everywhere? Well, because somebody hit it. That's a causal relationship. That when we're asking for a grounding, we're asking for a non-causal explanation for something. Like, again, why is there a cup there? Well, I can give a causal explanation. People molded a cup, and people had ceramics, and that was an agent, and there's a form, and there's Aristotelian 4 causes. That's all causal, though. That's not a grounding. The grounding is the primitives that make this up. The shape that it forms because of the primitives. That's a metaphysical grounding. How are you grounding your ontology? I'm grounding it in the primitives of the atoms that make up this cup. That's not causal. There's no causal relationship there. The atoms are not causing this cup to exist. It's just the form of it because of the relationship of the shape of the way the aggregate of these atoms are. That's how you have to look at a grounding.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, but this is where the presupper really confuses people when they start asking, how do you know something? How do you account for this? How do you ground it? They're not asking. Well, they don't even know what they're asking. They don't even know. But when a philosopher asks you what they mean when they say, how do you ground something like this? That's really what they're asking you. How do you non-causally justify? Matter of fact, remember I had Dr. Sijuan on, and we were talking about trope type distinctions and things of that nature.
I can't say as I do.
All right. Well, I had his paper somewhere. Yeah, here we go. He actually, in his paper, and I just brought it up here. I didn't put it on the outside, but I'm looking at it now. He starts trying to build grounding from trope theory, and he starts mentioning things like mental facts. They're grounded in neurological, psychological facts. Normative facts are based upon natural facts and ethics. Language, meaning is due to non-semantic facts. Chemistry, H2O molecules are grounded by hydrogen and oxygen atoms. So how do you account for a water molecule? Because it's grounded in the atomic structure. How do you account for mental facts? Because it's grounded in neurophysiological facts. How do you account for ethics? Because normative facts, your oughts, are based upon natural facts. To somebody who believes, in natural ethics.
I think with Jimbob, he's assuming, he makes the assumption, I believe, that in order for us to have agency and for our agency to have an impact on cause and effect, then there needs to have been something that has agency at the inception of everything that exists.
I agree with you. But that doesn't follow. Whereas we are of the opinion, or certainly I am of the opinion, that agency, we can have a chain of causation without agency that ends up with agency, us, as an emergent property of that causative chain. But here's the thing, John. That's still the reason why Dr. Sideron wrote his paper is to avoid this very situation that I think he's falling into. God is not a grounding for this stuff. If you're going to argue God is a causal relationship, it's not metaphysically grounded at that point. It's not. We're looking for a non-causal explanation. Like, why is it that we have abstractions? Right? We have abstract thought, we have numbers, we have classical law. Right? If those things are necessary, they're not caused by anything. God did not cause the laws of logic, and if he did, that's not a grounding.
Well, it's also the case. It's also the case that from that position, if God exists and has agency, this is where the argument that free will and our own agency is not possible if an agent is present at the inception of everything that exists, because then everything we do is hard determinism, because the fucking agent at the beginning is the one that determined it. So
there's a lot of problems with determining, positing a God that made everything deterministic. It's just But the biggest takeaway, I think, is that God doesn't ground this kind of stuff. If you want,
no,
because people say, "Well, I ground morality in God." Well, how? Okay, but wait a minute. Did God cause these moral theories? If he caused it, then it's not. You can't ground it. And if he didn't cause it, then why does these moral theories exist independent of God? This is the whole euphophobia dilemma, right? I mean, why is God certain things moral to God? Is it arbitrary? Is he beholden that these things must be moral? And even in divine command theory, it's not what makes it moral, but what God says. What makes it moral is your obedience to it. It's action based.
Yeah, and colloquially, you see the. I say colloquially. I use that word way too much. When people are having these discussions, you see, this often emerges as the distinction between, okay, is God revealing morals to us, or is morality being dictated by God? So moral determinism or moral revelation.
Yes, yeah, and there's issues with both of them.
Absolutely, there's massive issues with both of them.
Yeah, because if it's moral revelationism, then what makes these things moral? What about God's sovereignty? God is beholden to certain moral things. Why? What is about the moral? What is about the facts of the universe?
If it's moral revelation, then it can't be grounded in God.
Correct.
Whereas if it's moral determinism, it is grounded in God. But if it's moral determinism,
I don't even know if that can be grounded in God, because if it's moral determinism, then it's causal. He caused
exactly.
it. So I mean, this is what I'm saying. Is the problem with the presuppers is they think that God solves these problems, and I think they make them worse. It doesn't resolve anything.
It either makes them worse, or at best,
it doesn't do anything.
At best, it just kicks the can one step down the road.
Exactly. Which is, again, I said it amplifies your entities. It's non-parsimonious. This is the whole argument for atheism, is that positing God is not parsimonious because it's just adding more axioms that you don't need.
You could do a whole like series of episodes on the misuse of Occam's razor. I swear to Christ.
Well, hopefully some people got something out of this one. It's something I've been trying to do for a while. But was this good? I mean, did I steelman Jim's argument? Did I make sense about what they're asking for, what they think they're asking for, what they don't understand? But there's a difference between a moral grounding and a justification. And the presupper doesn't even know what the hell they're talking about. How do they expect their interlocutor to do when the interlocutor is answering the questions? Whether Grayson knew of this stuff or not, because of course Grayson's not going to know what these things are, because that's not his field. He's not supposed to. I mean, he's not going to know what moral grounding is. But he answered the questions properly, sufficiently to answer his questions. That's the takeaway.
And Grayson obviously, based on what we've just listened to, sufficiently answered the questions that Jimbob raised. But they in a very real sense were talking past one another. Jimbob was looking.
Jimbob has his own little thing. That's why he lives in his own little world of questions.
Jimbob, he's looking for something that I don't think is attainable on an atheistic worldview. I don't even think it's attainable on his worldview, but he presupposes that it is. So I think this is a circle.
Yeah, but notice you said
the positions that we're arguing. You can't square that circle.
Yeah,
never.
Here's the thing, though. He presupposes it. He hasn't come to a conclusion. God, he presupposed it. Doesn't get you anywhere.
Well, it's like what you were saying with like cause and effect before. Like, I mean, Jimbob presupposes the Christian God, and at some point, he has part of the cause of him presupposing the Christian God is somebody has explained the concept of the Christian God to him. Mm-hmm. That has to have had a causal impact.
Correct.
So
he didn't discover God. He didn't go out independently and go, "Oh, look, here's God. I'm going to observe God, and I'm going to learn about God directly from him." He didn't do any of that.
He didn't do any of that. He didn't go and sit in a damp cave with a dirty washcloth over his head and meditate and have the concept of God imported into his brain directly by God. Some fucker elsewhere on the planet explained it to him.
Every single human being that ever existed that has any claims to knowledge from God has gotten their information, which is not knowledge, from somebody else.
But last time I checked, that was a product of cause and effect. Yeah.
Which is, again, not a metaphysical grounding. Yeah, I think the problem is, again, that they don't even know what they're asking. And so if I was asked, John, how do you know something? And he tells me, well, this, this, and this, and then he's giving me an answer. He says, look, you know, I say, hey, John, how do you know that it's daytime? Well, I looked outside and I saw that it was daytime. Okay, that answers the question. That's not a mere reply. There's a difference between an answer and a reply. All answers are a reply, but not all replies are answers.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, as you well know, I subscribe to JTB. So
I go to JTP Plus because I do like the safety condition. It's not perfect, but it adds a little bit more. Tries to eliminate more of the Gettier problems. But I think direct causal theory, I like direct causal theory anymore. I think it's so simplistic. It works.
See, I think, like with JTB, with the Gettier problems, I think the Gettier problems, that they're made a much bigger deal than they actually
are.
Than the impact they have. Like every time I mention JTB and somebody goes, oh well, what about Gettier cases?
So what?
I'm like, well, there are more wrong answers than there are right answers.
Yeah.
And if I am reliably finding that my conclusions are a result of a Gettier case, then I should start playing the fucking lottery every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, because we still use JTB. It's just because we recognize there might be some possibilities where there's some epistemic luck. Okay, so what? Gettier, even in direct causal relationships, there's Gettier problems. But so what? Reliabilism isn't much better.
I would just like somebody to explain to me how a physical system, how a universe would function without the possibility of epistemic luck. How do you eliminate that? I think that necessarily has to exist.
Sure.
Epistemic luck has to exist.
Absolutely.
Because we have a series of options in front of us, and some of them are right, most of them are wrong. And just because you have incorrect methodology for determining the correct answer doesn't mean that you are guaranteed to always pick the incorrect answer based on that set of conditions.
Yeah.
So you could always accidentally pick the correct answer, and sometimes you will have a justification for picking that correct answer, and sometimes you won't.
Dr. Linda Zabesky literally wrote a paper on that very thing, showing that all belief first theories will have the suffering of epistemic luck, but who cares? I mean, it just doesn't mean you don't use that. But when I asked Jimbo,
it's a mathematical certainty based on that paradigm.
Yes, of course. But if I asked Jimbo, how do you know something? He has no theory of knowledge that he defaults to. He can't explain to me what knowledge even is.
No.
Because he doesn't even do any interpret. He always trying to do is argue against the atheist, and the atheist has no access to knowledge. Oh, well, I know it exists because God exists. How does that tell you anything? How does that have any influence on how you know something? When you know something, you appeal to a theory in philosophy. That's how you justify your claims. I don't know what the hell he thinks knowledge is, or how anybody would ever justify anything to him. How do you know that theory is correct? It doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. There isn't matter if that theory is correct or not. It is a theory that you can appeal to tell people you have knowledge. Whether you like that or not is absolutely irrelevant.
I get the distinct impression that Jimbob is the sort of person who would go, oh, well, evolution is just a theory. I'm like,
yeah, he does.
Well,
yeah,
but that a theory is, if he said evolution is just a hypothesis, I would disagree with him, because it's not a hypothesis. We've pierced the veil from hypothesis to theory.
Right.
But at least he would be philosophically consistent in how he's using the language.
Yeah. Well, like I said, he believes space is a superfluid helium.
What?
Yeah. He believes there's a barrier out there, not dome, but a barrier way far from us, but that all of space is filled with this substance that called superfluid helium.
Superfluid.
Again, when you start off with nonsense precept stuff, I already say that that's not a critical thinker, right? That's somebody who's not going to come to rational conclusions.
I'm just trying to think. So does he acknowledge?
He's not. He says he's not a flat earther, but he's a globe skeptic. He's not sure that the Earth is around.
What if? Right. Okay. So he doesn't even think. So he thinks the moon's a hologram and stars are luminaries, and they're not actually.
Probably. I don't know. I didn't ask him that. I only asked him.
No. Yeah. I'm based on what you've just said there. I am but that one bit of information I would suggest would allow me to reliably predict quite a lot of the positions that he has on all of this.
When you say you're a globe skeptic, you're automatically somebody that I'm going to put in the, okay, you're not really a critical thinker, right? I mean, there's certain things. Well, again, I always use a test of objective facts of the matter, such as mathematics. Mathematics is objective. When you start arguing things like x equals x is wrong, I am not going to treat you like a rational person. I'm not going to do it. And he doesn't understand objective math. He thinks math could be wrong.
At best, you're ignorant. At best,
you're giving far too much charity, man. If you really are, I can't do it. If somebody violates the law of identity and thinks that makes sense to do so, I mean, if you want to do a constructivist point of view and try to run some logic that doesn't have identity, that's fine. Again, I mean, even the moral groundings, it doesn't have reflexivity. The reflexive property doesn't hold. That's fine. But A still equals A. That still is a truism.
That's the thing. I can't. I really. That object is what it is. How it is what it is. Like it.
Well, I had one of them argue. Who argued the other day that was it Jimbob? Who was it? The guys the other day that was arguing. Time. And maybe somebody on Twitter, but it was just like, well, you can't step in the same river twice. It's like, yeah, but so what? It's a different time. It's a different river. But different over a period of time, something changes. But at any given moment, it is itself. All objects are itself. Now you could argue the difference between a noumenon and phenomenon. Okay, cool. I like the little distinction there between the phenomenology and the noumenon of things itself. But that doesn't mean that this thing isn't itself.
Well, like I mean, the not being able to cross the same river twice, whilst you're not physically stepping over the same molecules in exactly the same configuration that they were in before. That's sort of that argument that has the same issues as sort of the concept of like Platonic forms.
Yes,
there is a perfect chairness.
Yes,
or there is
rigid
a perfect
designators.
Viscidness. Yes, exactly. That's a nonsense. We know that's a nonsense.
But these are the precursors to things like rigid designators, Kripke's proper names in all possible worlds. These are the things with the ship of Theseus. Even if that ship has changed all its parts, it's still a name. It's a name attached to that thing. Just like I said, this cup is a composite. We're all composites. We are composites of primitives. Mm-hmm. Do we really exist? Does a picture exist? A picture is an abstraction.
And also,
but wait a minute. Hang on, John. A picture is a like, for example, a dot matrix picture is a collection of dots in an aggregate form, where they're put, that produces something. A crystal is in a certain form that produces a crystal. We are produced because of a certain form. I think that's pretty impressive, though, that the form we produce allows for tensile states.
It is, but also a picture, if it's been painted by a realist, if it's like a landscape or something, or a picture or a portrait of the person, that is an interpretation, a model of something that actually exists.
Right.
Now, it is not quote unquote incorrect or inaccurate, although it will have a degree of inaccuracy to it.
Because it's representation.
If there aren't exactly the same number of pixels to make up that image as the real object has atoms, it is, all of our models are imperfect, and they must be imperfect, because if they were perfect, they would in fact be that thing. In the same way that in simulation theory, a simulated computer inside the simulation could not create a perfect replica of the simulation that it is within. The resources do not exist. The time does not exist. So we do not. That's why our meteorological data is always shit, because we don't have the capacity to perfectly model the world in which we exist. They are always inaccurate because we can't perfectly model it, no matter how much observation we do.
How much? Because there's limited information as well. But there's also a thought experiment where you have this is a thing against determinism. You have two Turing complete computer systems trying to predict each other. It doesn't work, even in hard determinism.
Yeah,
they cannot predict each other. So, but anyways, I'm gone 2 hours, so I'm gonna wrap it up so Grayson can watch this, and let me know if I steelman Jimbob, if I answered his question. Hopefully you guys got something out of this about what the presupper means by, you know, how do you know something? How do you account for something? Moral groundings, because I don't think that they have a clue what they're talking about. And I might have got stuff wrong. That's fine. It's been, you know, it's just complicated stuff. But I mean, I think I did okay. So let me know what you guys think. Leave me a comment. John, I mean, did I do a reasonable analysis of that 10 minutes? So 10 minutes for a 2-hour video.
Yes.
But, you know, okay. Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
No, and I think you were as generous as you could reasonably have been towards Jimbob.
Thank you
as well. To be honest,
if somebody thinks I was wrong, let me know. I'm open to revision, but I did the best I can because of my understanding of the philosophy, my understanding of, I mean, I had this discussion with Dr. Sidgerwan when he was on my show about tropes, and the persons that I had on didn't understand what the fuck he was talking about. But I'm like, oh my God, you guys aren't even understanding this. And so it was very frustrating. And this is what I see with preceptors.
Personally, Steve, I don't think Jimbob would be able to return the favor. I don't think he would be able to steelman your position of
Not
him.
at all. No way. No possible way.
I think he would just regress back into the usual presuppers, the thought terminating cliches that they jettison on a regular basis.
Without question. Yeah. That's determinism. That's deterministic. That's exactly what he would do. All right, guys. I got to go. Appreciate it. I'm going to end the StreamYards, John. Appreciate you dropping by as always. Okay?
No, always enjoy him, Steve. Always enjoy him. So thanks for having me.
Yep. Good night. All right, guys. I am going to end this. Please let me know what you thought. Please let me know if I steelman him. Let me know if I answer the questions. Like I said, 2 hours to kind of talk about some of the basics of moral grounding and what properties we're looking for moral grounding, what they're being asked for. And again, the big takeaways is that I think that presuppers confuse what they're asking for on the moral, on some kind of metaphysical grounding. They don't even know what they're asking for. They're not asking for a simple causal mechanism. They're not asking for why did something occur. They're asking for a grounding for a non-causal relationship that has irreflexivity, has asymmetric, and has transitive properties that you can say that this is something we can ground from this, that this is not grounded to itself, and that if this grounds this, then that grounds that. So you can use one grounding to the other grounding to use the other grounding because it's transitive. That's what we mean by groundings. And so when a atheist says, look, I ground morals in unimoidia, or I ground morals in society, that is a proper grounding. Why? Because it's not a causal mechanism. There's no causal relationship between society and the morals. That's why they call it a grounding. If I want to say, well, why do I know there's a cup there? The grounding is because I'm talking about the primitives. Why do we have atoms? You can ground that in the constitutive parts of the atom for the protons and neutrons. Again, there's no causal relationships there. There's a difference between the causation, justification of something, like a causal relationship of why do I believe there's a cup there? Because there's a causal relationship. Why are you grounded to believe that? Because of the arrangement of the primitives. There you go. I mean, it gets way more complicated than that, guys, but I mean, superficial understanding, but just to show you that the presuppers don't even know what they're asking for when they ask you to account for something. Don't overthink it. Just remember that when they're asking you to account for something, they're asking in a philosophical sense, what they don't recognize is that they're asking for a non-causal explanation that will explain something other than, the laws of physics. This is where I see atheists make the mistake. Well, how do you ground that? Oh, the laws of physics. Well, that does not a grounding because it was causal. How do you ground the laws of physics? Well, they might be because of natural law, that because of something else in the universe that's non-causal. That's what they mean by grounding. So, all right, guys, thank you very much. Please leave me a comment. Please share the video. Please like, subscribe, and by all means, become a member of the channel. Hit that join button. You get a cool name like John there. And I'm starting to try to build up my memberships again because I've been putting out some content. I've had my nights free. This first day I've had that I wanted to free to do it during the daytime. So I'm putting out content. All right. Good night.